Hey, my reflection today on the fifth Sunday of Lent is a combination between the gospel reading, which is about the foot washing, and Philippians. So, a survivor of the Holocaust who later became a theologian was once asked to identify what was the worst sin a person could commit. His response was a bit surprising. You might think he would list genocide or racism or hatred, but instead, the great Jewish theologian said, the worst of all humans, the sins that they can commit is despair. It is the moment when the present circumstances seem so overwhelming and hopeless to a person that they give up on the future, on the possibilities of a better world. Such a person twists their memory into chains and becomes imprisoned in the past. And without a future, that person ceases to become fully alive, fully human, and more than this, such despair is a way of saying to God or about God that the best days are all behind, that even God himself is as trapped in the past as they are. Despair is our way of saying that God has petered out. It is a grievous sin, not because it angers God, but because it marks the end of our lives, of our usefulness. All that is left for the brain is to die, for the soul has already quit. In our gospel today, Jesus is in Bethany, the place of affliction. Bethlehem, the place of his birth, was the house of bread. So to Bethany he went to be with friends, and even there he is in contact with both friends and foe. The one who turned water into wine, good wine, gathers us together in one house under one roof. We will keep the feast of love and gratitude and offer it to Jesus as a sign of our devotion. He will take our poverty and our afflictions, our disagreements, and our not so pure motives, our sin and our inability to get out from underneath the weight of death, he will bless it. Jesus will turn us into a healing oil poured out for the wounds of the world. Under one roof, there is a place for Lazarus bearing witness to new life, while Jesus names at the same time the importance of the day of his burial. There is a place for disciples, same in that place, betraying their Lord, and for the disciples that are there trying to honor him. In one house, under one roof, hard questions are asked, motives are questioned, piety and poverty are topics of conversation. Yes, friends, this is us. This is the household of God. Judas misrepresents the content of his heart, just like those sons in last week's reading. We are in chapter 12, where Lazarus, no longer dead, he's up and eating as a matter of fact, and Martha's still doing her thing, serving, God bless her, and Mary has her heart set on being at the feet of Jesus. They are celebrating the gift of life. They are together the way that we gather together when it's the weekend. For someone's been planning for days, and doing the cooking and for hours. At some point, Mary makes her move. She has an expensive vial of ointment in her hands, an oil so rare and so pure, no one in Bethany can afford it. And before anyone can wrap their minds around what exactly is happening, she has broken it open. Jesus' feet are drenched. She rubs it in, and when the skin can't absorb anymore, she removes the excess with her hair. Like it's appropriate, like no one is watching. Aha, Judas is watching, and Jesus is appreciating what she is doing. And Jesus' response? Well, it will be costly, but he will do it. He's going to die for us. Could God be trying to tell us something about death or something about intimacy? And our reading from Paul's letter to the Philippians illustrates the same kind of truth. Paul was in prison, even as he wrote this brief letter. And yet his eye was on the future, and with such hope and his optimism, none of that good stuff could be stripped from him, even as his captors took all from him, his possessions and his freedom. And because Paul kept his hope, even in those desperate circumstances, he maintained an irrepressible joy that almost jumps right out of the pages of the epistle to the Philippians. And here we are, 2,000 years later, deep into the weeks of Lent, and some of us lack the same joy Paul knew. Some of us are focused on what we have given up or how long it's been since we've had a party. But Lent is not a season of sorrow. It is a time to shift focus, to clarify vision, to remember the real path of joy is not found in avoiding suffering, but by moving with faith through suffering. Maybe Paul's word from prison is a word to us too. How could his suffering or ours purify joy and strengthen hope instead of leading toward the precipice of despair? First, lasting joy comes from focusing on the surpassing gain of knowing Christ rather than on temporal gains or losses on this world's market. It sounds a little too otherworldly, I know, but hear me out. In the previous verses of his letter, Paul had been listing for the Philippians a set of his worldly accomplishments, his pedigree, his resume of accomplishments, his great reputation. And we each have this list, don't we? We each have a set of degrees framed on a wall or a list of social organizations in which we hold membership or served on their board or property holdings or bank accounts. But Paul is saying that all of these things, noble as they might be in their own way, have only temporary ability to provide joy. Eventually, we will be separated from each of these treasures by time, by our own mistakes, by shifts in the global economy, or just by our own death. And then what? Paul urges his readers to keep invested in the only relationship that will transcend all of life's ups and downs and will even transcend death itself. And that is our relationship with God through Christ. When Paul thinks about that relationship, his heart swells with joy and gratitude, for he knows that it is pure grace from God that makes this relationship possible in the first place. We do not find Christ, he finds us. Our Christian faith is not our accomplishment, it is God's accomplishment. And therefore, Paul considers that relationship his greatest gain in life. So great that all else is compared to being mere rubbish. He uses that strong word to emphasize his point. But Paul does not hesitate to drive home his point. The path of joy is only found on keeping a very loose grasp on that which the world grips so hard. And instead, we need to focus on grasping the value of knowing Christ and being known by him. Nothing else in life can replace that joy. Nothing. And second, in his message from Paul in this reading is the importance of keeping one's focus on the future rather than on the past. You know, he borrows an image from the Roman games, an image of the athletes that he understands. He compares himself to a runner whose eye is on the finish line. Athletes learn early to endure the pain that's needed of practice and training, the boring hours put into it in order to be in condition to compete to win the game. And how do they do it? They keep their mind trained on the goal rather than on the temporary muscle pain and boring routine of the training. And during the contest, the same athlete keeps his eye on the final goal, the finish line. And that coach of the University of Alabama He's famous for keeping his players' attention focused on the finishing a game, finishing a season, not stopping or sagging in intensity until the very end. There's another person, his Sir Thomas Lipton, goes way back. I mean, he was actually on Time Magazine when Time Magazine only cost 15 cents. But he was a person who he had yachts. They were named Shamrock. He was from Ireland, of course. And he would try to compete all the time. And he finally got the trophy for being the best loser. So you lose gracefully and you win gracefully. And should the Christian be any less focused than either of those two, the Alabama coach or Lipton? Let past hurts and past accomplishments just stay there in the past. The only way to win is to press forward, not to dwell on the past. You know, in November of 2004, there were two women lined up for the New York City Marathon, and one of them was from Kenya. And she made headlines by setting a new record, winning pace at 2 hours, 22 minutes, and some seconds. But the other woman was somebody who ran the 26-mile race also, and her notice in the paper was not on the front page, but is no less dramatic. Because you see, Zoe had diabetes and multiple sclerosis. She competed the grueling race in 29 hours and 45 minutes. She was the last competitor to cross the finish line more than a full day after world-class athletes. But if you compare the pictures of both women as they cross the tape, you see the same inexpressible joy. It is not winning the race, it is finishing that matters. And the only way to finish at whatever pace is to keep your eye on not the clock, but on the finish. And this is Paul's point exactly. When he thinks about the human race, just one thing, forgetting what lies behind, but straining forward to what lies ahead. I, meaning Paul, continue my pursuit toward the goal, the prize of winning God's upward calling in Jesus Christ. Now, there's a good word for all of us, especially during this last week of Lent. So lace up your spiritual shoes. On your mark, get set, go. And the people said, Amen.